Can you still hear it crackling, folks? I really gave it the spurs now. The Harley-Davidson Pan America 1250 ST here on our HOTLAP Testtrack has truly ridden straight into my heart. Why and how? The answers in this video. The Harley-Davidson Pan America ST is actually a pretty easy bike to explain. You take 152 horsepower, a 1250 cubic centimeter V-twin, put it into a 17-inch chassis with shortened suspension components, add proper brakes and some really good tires. They're standard equipment, but they're brilliant. And then you've got yourself a weapon, because there's simply no replacement for displacement. And when that displacement is served up this appetizingly, you've got one seriously mighty motorcycle. There's only one but with this thing. It's comfortable and relatively heavy. And I say relatively heavy compared to other sporty bikes, because yes, it is a sporty bike, but one thing at a time. I'm still full of adrenaline because that ride was just incredible. We've got the engine I really rate, the Pan America motor, coming in this massively powerful V-twin configuration. And you get this feeling that you've got something truly brutal in front of you. But that brutality only really shows itself in the form of acceleration. That means in overrun, underload, even when you're just rolling along to keep the way the torque curve builds, it's all super pleasant. I think many Harley-Davidson buyers might not love that because they'd probably prefer something a bit rougher, noisier, wilder, something that really shakes you in the saddle. But this isn't that. It's really well done. You've got an engine you can actually use. You can get real practical benefits out of it, like great acceleration, high cornering speeds, and genuinely comfortable long-distance riding. We picked the bike up, I think, with about 1,000 kilometers on the clock, and somehow we've added another 2,000 this week. I don't even know how that happened. Somehow everyone wanted to go and nobody could stop riding it. Out here on the track, one thing was especially fascinating. I've ridden it again here, comparing it against other bikes. It's still got those original equipment tires, the Michelin Scorcher Sport. I'm not entirely sure what exact spec they are, but what's fascinating is how incredibly nimble it feels. It really wants to pull toward the inside line, and that's impressive for such a big, heavy bike, a machine that's essentially designed for long-distance comfort. But it still brings that bit of hang-off hooligan mentality. When you want to take a corner, it really dives into the radius. And I think that's something you just wouldn't expect from it. I noticed the same thing at the Pannonia Ring. We tested the bike there too, because we really put our test bikes through their paces. Last week at the Pannonia Ring, I found it stable and pleasant, and it handled well through fast sweepers. But that it eats up tight corners like this, I hadn't noticed that before. And that, I think, is a really good sign for those who will be riding this machine over alpine passes. You do need to give the tire a bit of time to warm up, and once it's up to temperature, it can really show what it's capable of. Then it's properly sporty, a relaxed, precise line holder. And now I've tried to give it my best here, and I'm not entirely sure where my lap time will end up on our best time leaderboard via the RideLink Wingman, but we'll see at the end of the day. But there was one limiting factor, the lean angle clearance. That's something you always run into with touring bikes, even when they're built with a sporty character. But I have to say there was something else too. Even though the whole setup is sporty, I did have a few sections where I just couldn't get back on the throttle early enough. There's one spot here, for example, where you dive into a corner and then you've got this dip. In Austria, we'd call it a Suter. And right after that, there's a small crest, a bit of a wheelie bump. And with other bikes, I managed that section better. What happens here is that you start to notice, yes, the suspension is sportily tuned. I've dialed in a bit more damping, but there's still a slight touch of restlessness in there, which means I always had to wait until the rear settled a bit before I could get back on the throttle. It's actually a spot-on compromise. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all. I'd say there's probably about half a second left on the table somewhere because in those trickier sections, I just didn't dare to get on the gas early enough. But on the other hand, that comfort, that slightly doughy feel, didn't come across as unpleasant. Instead, I thought, okay, as a whole package, it works really well. You've got a fairly soft seat, which is fine. And as you know, I'm normally a fan of harder saddles for long distance rides. But here, it actually adds to the overall feeling. So it's a bit unfair to just say it's soft. Part of that comes from the seat, part from the suspension. Here on the test track, you feel it more. But out on real roads, in Sardinia, the Dolomites, or wherever you ride, it'll feel absolutely right. The brakes were good too. The electronic rider aids perfectly fine. And honestly, it's impressive what this touring-oriented bike can deliver in sporty riding. For me personally, it was a really positive surprise to see just how sportily it can be ridden, especially on corner entry. I don't know how many of you are actually buying this model. It's still quite a niche one, even within the Pan America range. The other Pan Americas are more like proper touring cruisers, where you might take the occasional gravel road. But this is more of an alternative to the BMW S1000 XR, to the KTM 1290 Super Duke GT, maybe even something from Ducati's 17-inch Multistrada lineup. I don't know who among you has bought one, but if you have, let me know in the comments how your long-term experience has been. For me, this was a fresh and positive impression from Harley-Davidson, and I'm really curious to see how it stacks up against the proper adventure tourers, whether it can leverage that 17-inch advantage, or whether I'm just overly enthusiastic and it actually rides worse than the 19-inch adventure bikes. Let's see what the lap time chart has to say.